Hey, Eagle fans, it's EaglefanKarl. It's been a while since I've checked in. I know I haven't checked in since the draft. So I thought I'd just quick do a check-in, let you know what I thought of the draft and some of the things that have happened since and more recently, especially this week, with the big news that we finally signed a running back. So I just thought I'd quick give some thoughts as to some of those things. But I do want to start off with the draft. Those of you who watched my pre-draft videos that I did looking at some of the players that the Eagles could possibly take, I'm sure you're not going to be surprised that I was thrilled, especially with the beginning of this draft. I'll go ahead and put links up to the videos I did right before the draft. But it's no surprise to anyone that has watched those videos to know that I was thrilled with the Derek Barnett pick. I really liked what we did there. I think that's going to be a huge addition to the defense. I think it's something the defense sorely needs. And the other thing was, I had said that we really needed to get some cornerbacks, and we went ahead and did that in the second and third rounds. And if you saw the videos, you also know that I was a big fan of Sidney Jones before he had the injury. Whether or not you should be taking him in the second round with that injury is a question I'll get into in a moment. But I think overall, I was really pleased with this draft, and I really have to give the Eagles a thumbs up for what they did in this draft. I think this has got Joe Douglas's fingerprints all over it in terms of what they've done. And I think that this just goes to show that the team hopefully now is headed in the right direction, especially as it relates to the draft and picking player personnel and the like. I think Howie Roseman is great at doing the contract part of it, not so much the player evaluation, but it sounds like that maybe he's allowed Joe Douglas to take a little more of the lead on that area, which I think is great. And I just think overall the team has taken a step forward as a result of the draft that we had. And then ultimately, I'll be talking a little bit about some of the undrafted free agents that we brought in as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the Eagles did in this draft and what it means for the team. And for starters, I really want to start out by just taking a look at the draft overall and some of the things that I like the way the Eagles did things. I like the way that they worked in terms of some of the trades that they made, moving back a couple positions and so that they'd be able to get picks later on. As we get later in some of the draft picks that they made, I think you'll show why I was a fan of some of the things that they did with this. But basically, they didn't end up with any 7th round picks, but ended up with an extra 5th round pick and a 6th round pick that they didn't have before. So some of these things, some of the moves that they made, I think I was a real fan of. And overall, if you look at the needs that I thought the Eagles had coming into this draft, I had said the 4 main positions they have needs for are defensive end, cornerback, wide receiver, and running back. And you look at the first 6 picks that we made, and they are all on those areas. So it's clear that the Eagles understood what their needs were going into this draft. And I think the way that they worked the board, I think, was smart. And as a result, I think we ended up with a very good draft class overall. But let's go ahead and start with the number 1 pick, Derek Barnett. Obviously, as I said before, I'm a big fan of this pick. I am not going to reiterate all the reasons why I was a big fan of Derek Barnett. But suffice it to say, I think he's going to be a great addition. I think it's really going to make our defensive line quite a bit better. And I think ultimately that helps the cornerbacks as well. I know there's been a lot of talk about, how poor our cornerbacks are and drafting some rookies and what are you going to do with that. But I think the defensive line being better and the pass rush being better automatically is going to improve the cornerbacks for no other reason than it just puts more pressure on the quarterback, and the quarterback might not be able to make the best decisions, and therefore the cornerbacks don't have to keep the coverage as long as they do. But I think Derek Barnett is a great addition. I've heard people saying that he's not going to start, and that might very well be the case at the beginning of the season, but I can't imagine that Vinny Curry is going to be playing over him come the second half of the season, unless there's an injury or something like that. I would expect that Derek Barnett is going to be starting by the second half of the season. And a lot of that also has to do with the fact that Vinny Curry, let's face it, is basically a one-trick pony. All he does is he's decent at the pass rush, whereas Derek Barnett is a more complete player. He plays the run better, and for those reasons, I think he's a better first, second, and third down option, whereas Vinny Curry is really just a third down option. So for those reasons, I really like the pick, and I really think that we've taken a step forward with our defense with this selection. That brings us to the second round pick, Sidney Jones. And when this came out, I was shocked that the Eagles would take Sidney Jones in the second round. I figured Sidney Jones would probably fall to the third round given his injuries. Also was curious because there were some cornerbacks that were still on the board that could have helped immediately. There was cornerbacks that were still on the board at 43 that some people had going in the first round. I think of Quincy Wilson out of Florida. I think of Tease Tabor. I think of Chidobe Awuzie, who the Cowboys took later in the second round. So all of those guys were still available when the Eagles made this selection. Now, I think Sidney Jones, if he's able to come back from the injury and be the player he was at the University of Washington, is absolutely worth this pick. The way I heard it put is this way. Would you trade a second-round pick this year for a first-round pick next year? And most people would. And Sidney Jones has the capability of being a first-round type of selection. Before the injury, everyone had him going in the first round. And as a result of that, if he's able to come back, even if it takes him the whole year, he doesn't play at all in 2017, and he doesn't come back until 2018, basically it's like you got an extra first-round pick. Now, there is a big if on that, and that's if he's able to come back at 100%. And that's a major question mark. I think this is one of those areas where we're going to have to trust the Eagles' medical staff that they've done their homework on this. I hope that he's able to come back to be the player he was, because if he is, like I said, before he got the injury, he was the guy that I really thought the Eagles should select at 14. But after that injury occurred, that's when I started looking more and liking Derek Barnett more. So ultimately, the two guys that I had sort of looked at for the Eagles taking at number 14, they got in the first and second round. So from that perspective, I'm thrilled. I'm just hoping that Sidney Jones is able to come back from the injuries like everyone thinks. And that brings us to our third round pick, Rasul Douglas. And I really think that this could be potentially a steal pick in the third round. First of all, it's a cornerback who can start immediately. He's got height. He doesn't always have the speed, which is could become a problem in the NFL. But apparently he's got a good eye and mind for the ball. And I think for all those reasons, he's going to be someone that you might see early on in his rookie season. He's probably going to have some situations where he's going to get himself in trouble. He's probably going to try and take some chances that maybe he shouldn't. That's going to be something he's going to have to learn and adjust to in the NFL. But I think if he can make that adjustment and learn when to take the chances and when not to, he's going to be a guy who's really going to be good for us. Everything I've heard coming out of the Eagles rookie minicamp was that he's turning heads, and the coaches really love him. And I think that he's a guy that could come in immediately and play, if not as a starting cornerback, certainly as the slot corner. And the way teams use three cornerbacks because of the offense is using three wide receivers all the time, it's almost like he's a starter then if he's playing in the slot corner position, because most teams end up playing three cornerbacks more times than not. So for those reasons, I really like this pick. I think he's someone that can provide an impact right away. And given the time to grow, I think he can be a really good cornerback. And ultimately, if Sidney Jones is able to come back to what he was, I think Jones and Douglas will make a great starting quarter combo going forward for the next several years, which is what I had said I really thought the Eagles needed to do in this draft, was get two guys that they could build around as cornerbacks, which I think the Eagles have done that. Not necessarily for this season, but for the future seasons. After the first three rounds, it sort of gets a little bit more into a crapshoot in terms of players that you're selecting. So I'm not going to take a lot of time to talk about all these guys. Mac Hollins is another guy that I think he could become a Jordan Matthews kind of player, where he's potentially could end up becoming like a slot receiver, and maybe is probably best in that situation. He's got some height. So I think that, given time, he can work into a good situation, but he's not someone that I think we can come in and expect that he's immediately going to start challenging for a starting position on this team. But I think he could potentially contribute down the road, especially given the fact that when you think about that we only have Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith on basically one-year deals. Torrey Smith is more, but it's basically a one-year deal. This is a guy who could potentially give a lot more contributions down the road, and for a fourth-round pick, that's really what you want. Darnell Humphrey is another guy that sort of is someone that down the road could really be a great addition to this team. I think that from everything I've read about him, he's sort of like Darren Sproles 2.0. Maybe just a little bit smaller of a version, if you can actually believe that. I think he's probably got to put a little bit more weight on because that's the biggest difference between him and Sproles is he weighs a little bit less than Sproles does. So if they can get him in the weight room and get a little more weight on him, I think that that's probably going to be best for his career long term, so that he can survive in the NFL. But from everything I've read, his speed is fantastic, so for that reason, I think he could be a great kind of change of pace back in our backfield in the long term, especially when you consider Darren Sproles is planning on retiring at the end of this upcoming season. Shelton Gibson, similar to Mac Hollins, is a guy that down the road will potentially be able to really provide something. He's sort of a deep threat, similar to what Torrey Smith is, so he could become a replacement for Torrey Smith. So for those reasons, I think that this was a good selection. When you get to the fifth round, anyone that could potentially contribute to you, I think is going to be good for you long term. So it just remains to be seen whether or not these guys can contribute and are positive selections for us. That's the only way you're really going to know with a lot of these guys. Is giving them time. Nathan Gerry is the only one that I sort of have some reservations about because he was a safety throughout his college career. They want to convert him to a linebacker. If they're looking for him to be a special teams kind of player, then he's probably going to be a great selection. But I don't see how he's going to be a long-term solution at a linebacker position. I think he's a little undersized. And for those reasons, I'm not that much of a fan of this pick unless they're purely looking at him as a special teams player. If that's the case, then this is probably a good selection. But overall, I'm not a huge fan of this selection. But that does bring me to the next selection, and that's Elijah Quarles, which is our sixth-round pick, our last pick of the draft, which I am a huge fan of this pick. From everything I've read about this guy, he's sort of in the mold of a Hollis Thomas. And Hollis Thomas, I know when he played for us, he wasn't making Pro Bowls and stuff like that all the time, but he was a solid run stopper in the middle of the defensive line. And you need those kind of guys, especially when it's late in the game. If another team has the lead, you need to be able to put a guy out there who's able to stop the run. That's been something we've been weak at over the years. A lot of our defensive tackles are great at rushing the passer. Fletcher Cox, his run-stopping ability is good, but ultimately he's really the only one that we've got. Some of the other guys are not quite as strong in that. We just really need a guy who they can put out there that's designed to stop the run, and I think that's where he can really contribute. So I really like this pick. I think he's the one that might be the sleeper pick that down the road you look at and say, wow, I can't believe we got him in the sixth round. He's been a great contributor for us. Like I said, I don't see him making Pro Bowls and stuff like that, but he can be a quality contributor and a role player, and every team needs those kind of guys. And if Elijah Quarles turns into someone like that, I think this is a great pick for the sixth round. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the unrestricted free agents that we signed, but I do want to talk briefly about Corey Clement out of Wisconsin, because a lot of people thought that he was going to actually get drafted. So the fact that he's an undrafted free agent probably means that the Eagles got a good deal here. He's someone that, is Darnell Humphrey is certainly a smaller guy that probably is not going to be able to be a workhorse back. Corey Clement has the potential to be that down the road. Whether or not he can actually do that remains to be seen. And that's going to bring up the next piece of news that came out of this week, and that's the signing of LeGarrette Blount. And I really think that this is a good signing for us. Once again, similar to what the Eagles did with some of the other free agent selections and trades that they made. He's on a one-year deal, so they can really see if he's going to fit long-term, so you're really not taking that much of a risk. I know that people have said, he only works in New England. Whenever he's been in other places, he hasn't worked out. And that might all be true, but he's only on a one-year deal. So if he doesn't work out, you're really not out that much. So you've got a guy that was great in short yardage situations, which we were terrible at last year. So if you've got a guy, if you need someone in a goal line situation, if you need someone on a 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2, this is a guy that you can bring in to get those yards. And I think that he's someone that can be more of a power back that we really haven't had. Now, I think ultimately he is probably going to be the starting running back. I think this definitely means that they're going to get rid of Ryan Matthews. So if you do all that, then I think LeGarrette Blount makes a lot of sense. You've got LeGarrette Blount, you've got Darren Sproles, you've got Darnell Humphrey, and you've got Clement. And if you've got all of those guys, I think you've got the workings of a makeable, backfield that will be a running back by committee. And that's really what the Eagles need. The Eagles don't need a guy who's going to be someone that's going to, be someone that's going to run the ball 25, 30 times a game like Ezekiel Elliott or someone like that. That's not what the Eagles offense is based on. They want to be able to run the ball when they have to, and they want a running back that can catch the ball out of the backfield. And all of the guys they've got basically are able to do some of that stuff. And I think that this is, so for that reason, I think this is a great selection. LeGarrette Blount, here's an interesting fact that I was reading about him, had 18 touchdowns for the Patriots. That's more than our team had last year, at least our offense had last year. So that says a lot when here's a guy who had more touchdowns than our entire team did. That says something as to, what he's going to potentially be able to bring to the table going forward in the next year, is hopefully that red zone person that defenses are going to have to take seriously. That also opens up then some of the passing game when you get down into the red zone because they're going to have to take the running game seriously, which I didn't think teams had to do last year. So hopefully LeGarrette Blount will be able to work out and sort of set a blueprint for what this team could do going forward as the running back of what we're going to need as far as this type of running back. So there are my thoughts on the Eagles draft and the signing of LeGarrette Blount. Let me know what you think. Do you think the Eagles had a good draft like I do? Are you a fan of the Derek Barnett signing, or do you think I'm being too much of a fanboy there? Do you think we took too much of a risk drafting Sidney Jones in the 2nd round? And also, what do you think of the LeGarrette Blount signing? Do you think that was a good signing or not? Let me know that in the comments below. As we go through the rest of the offseason, I'll check in when something noteworthy happens. Otherwise, I'll be checking in once again once we get into the preseason and such. But until then, fly Eagles fly.